So I thought I'd show you something a little different with this juniper today. This juniper is something that I picked up from a bonsai auction a couple of months ago, and I haven't figured out quite what to do with it. It's got a very floppy top, very healthy foliage, but very floppy on the top of this thin trunk. It has a little deadwood that looks like it had been created with the intention of having that be a feature at some point, but the bark is strongly rolled over this because of all of this foliage. I really haven't been super inspired by this piece. But let's see what we can do with it. And I'm just going to wing it today. I'll try to get in there and show you a little bit of wiring technique because that was requested by some of the subscribers and viewers on the tube. So let's get into it. First thing I'm going to do is not find a front. I'm doing everything I can to not have this have a front, but maybe it will. I'm just going to see what happens. One thing that I do notice is that this trunk, the strongest part of the trunk, has a curve, and I can bend that in pretty easily. I can possibly straighten that up. I can move that back and forth, but I do notice from one side the curve is almost gone. So I would like to put in maybe a couple of other curves into this. And actually I might just get a little crazy with this one. I'm going to be keeping mainly this one thick trunk, and I'm going to be turning these other two pieces into deadwood. So I already know right now that I'm not going to need all of these foliage masses from that, so those are going to go ahead and get simplified right now. Yeah, not gonna need those. Alright, that's a hunk of foliage gone. That'll really simplify the process of styling this one. And I still have a ton of foliage here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to strip the bark on these, and I'm going to apply some wire on these along with the rest of the trunk. And when those set into place, they'll pretty much hold that shape. Typically when you wire a tree, the new growth, the new layers of bark will set that into place. It'll kind of encapsulate in whatever shape that is. But since this will no longer be growing out of these trimmed branches, the twist that I'm going to be doing should help set those in place just by the drying of the sap and everything. So I'm just taking a pair of pliers. These are special pliers for making gin. It's not really much to them. I mean, it's really just a pair of pliers. They just happen to be easy to get in and around all these branches. And I'm smashing the live branches a little bit, which loosens up the cambium layer. Makes it easier to peel these. This can be done just by your hands if you don't have the tools, and really honestly any pliers will do it. This is just a standard pair of pliers, and I do use this quite a bit for this job also. It's just they're so much heavier, and these I've already ground a couple of other tool bits to them. These have a point and more like a blade almost on it. So that's what you're doing, you're smashing this cambium layer. You'll notice that there is, on a healthy tree, a lot of green and white in there. Then if you've loosened it up properly, what's going to happen is it's just going to peel right off. The reason why I do this is because the drying works a lot better when there's no bark insulating it. An alternative way you can do this is you can actually style branches with the intention of having them become gin at some point. That is actually very effective because the growth on the branches, the new bark and cambium layers that it creates every year, will help set it into place. If you leave the wire on there long enough, you'll get some interesting twists and turns. in the dead wood. So that is very effective, but to simplify the design and just make it easier to work with, I'm going ahead and I'm removing all of this. So there's that one, and now I'm going to work on the top. Okay, so that trunk and this branch down here, those are ready to make gin out of. To do that, I'm going to take a rather thick wire and I'm going to move from this branch around the trunk and up that branch. So I'm going to get a length that is quite long. I need to go at least the length of this branch plus that branch, and then probably one more length of my measuring tool to make that happen. Like I said, pretty thick wire, maybe about 1/3 the diameter of that. So there's that wire. And I want to get at least 1 or 2 wraps around the trunk section of it between those. So I got a full wrap around that. Now I can come around the top of this one. And I'm keeping, I don't know, 50, 60 degree angle there. And you know what? It's okay if this is not perfect. This is to bend around some dead wood. And this is not going to be exhibited. All I really needed this to do is hold it in place. It's okay if this is too tight because there's no bark there for it to cut into. There is bark here, so I want to make sure I keep space on that. And this is standard aluminum wire. This is a perfect level of expense to go on this because it doesn't need to look pretty. All it needs to do is a job. Okay, so I have a couple of sections here that are without wire that I do want to put some twists on. So I'm going to add a little bit more wire for those parts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the twist of the wire. It comes around this way, spins in that direction, so I'm also going to take my hand and spin it in that direction, which will tighten it up. Probably actually going to have to use wire pliers to do this. It's much more leverage with a tool than with my hands. Alright, that's probably believable as a gin there. So what I'm going to do, because I expect to develop some breaks on this, is I'm going to go ahead and apply some tape all the way from low on the trunk up through most of this branch here. I may wind up getting into some really steep, sharp bends there, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. The tape that I use for that is just regular old electric tape. And this stuff, what I like to do is I'll actually apply it for the first wrap, sticky side out. So the sticky side in will stick to this bark, probably leave some residue because it's going to be out in the hot sun, and it's going to be really difficult to remove and could even potentially take off some of the bark that's healed up nicely when I go and remove this. So instead of having that issue, I just make the first go around, sticky side out. And wrap it somewhat tight for this one, but really this is just a protection for the trunk. When I come back sticky side in, it'll have a lot tighter wrap on it. If you've watched enough bonsai videos and other demonstrations, you may have seen people using raffia. Raffia is pretty good for this too. I just have a lot of this electrical tape lying around from other things that I do. Been doing a lot of remodeling the house lately, and so electrical tape is something that I've used quite a bit. It's pretty cheap. It's easy to apply. If I run out of it for this one, I have another roll. I don't have to wait to soak it in the water. It has a decent amount of compression strength to it. Now raffia also has some of those similar properties, and actually as it dries after you've wet it, it will constrict quite a bit and really hold pretty well. Raffia I found is not that easy to take off. Alright, so I've done the sticky side all the way. Just going to flip it over and start wrapping sticky side in. Alright, so now that that's sticky side in, I'm going to wrap that quite a bit tighter and come back towards the bottom. Alright, that's pretty cleanly wrapped. I got all the electrical tape stuck to it, so if I do develop a break, it's going to be an instant bandage on it. Now I'm going to wrap most of the thick trunk with some thick wire. Before I go and make any bends on the thick trunk, I'm also going to go ahead and wire the thinner branches. That way when I'm ready to wire those, I don't have to get into the tight twists and turns as I go. So it's just, for me, a little bit easier way to wire. So here we go with the thick stuff. This is going to need really thick wire for the trunk. I'm just going to use my thickest stuff for that. To start this super thick wire, I'm going to put it in between the roots here at the bottom and start wrapping in one direction. I always wind up wrapping counterclockwise for whatever reason. I think just because that's comfortable for me. But if you are intending to spin in a certain direction, you got to take that into account. Okay, so I'm going to plug this in between the roots and then start twisting it around the tree as I go. Let's find a good spot in the roots. Yeah, looks good. And I am trying to jab that in there far enough to hold. This is not a typical operation for me. Most of the trunks I work with, I don't bend this low. But this one, I'm going to use this wire partly as an attachment point because the trunk is not very thick. But this wire wrapped around it will be very strong in most places, and I can attach guy wires and pull pieces together that I want to. Getting to the part in the top, it's a little bit more full of foliage. Gonna have to push stuff out of the way as I go up here. Okay, got the thick wire on there. I'm gonna go ahead and take some wire to these other parts here. Since most of these are directly across from each other, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select the ones that I like the most. So this one's nice and thick. I really want that one. and this one's going to wind up being probably in an odd spot. So this one gone, this one gone. All right, so I simplified that quite a bit. I took off several branches that were in the way. Once I get up here towards the top, I'm probably going to use these all quite a bit to fan out. So this one's pretty thick and this one's pretty thin. This one's about half the width of this. I'm going to go ahead and give this one priority and go this thickness for the wire. All right, so what I've done is I've wound this kind of evenly spaced coil around that branch, and then I've connected that to this other branch up here and gone kind of evenly spaced. I have almost all the way to the tip on that. I'm not getting super detailed on this wiring. I'm mainly placing structure on these branches that are here. They have plenty of beautiful foliage that'll make some cool pads out of it. I'm going to continue on with the rest of these branches, and then I'll start to do major bends. Right, it is time to do major bends on this. I look at a whole tree. I never look at just the front of a tree. So I'm going to get some pretty strong wire, and I'm going to take from some of these points and create some movement. First one I'm going to do is pretty strong. I'm going to take from about here and go to back here. I'm going to try to compress that quite a bit. So it's going to take a burly wire to do that. All right, I've already made a huge bend on that. This point already has a lot of bending that is trying to happen on it. I may go just until the breaking point and then position in another spot. I have just doubled over this little juniper. And what I'm going to do next . Okay, so what I've been working on is extreme compression on this point. This is actually the trunk. I decided I had thick enough wire and I had strong enough wrapping that I could wrap it around there. Developed a crack inside of this and I can hear it cracking. But I am not concerned about that because the part that has the living tissue is underneath it, and the part on top had the dead wood. I expected that to crack like that. And all I'm going to do is just hold it in place with some wire. So that's a lot of compression on that. And looking at it from multiple angles, I have a lot of movement on this guy. That's some craziness going on. All right, lowest branch first. If I was to pick one viewing angle, this would probably be the front. Although as I turn it, it can still look pretty cool. Just takes a little tweak here and there. It's probably going to take many years to develop many fronts on this. But yeah, I'm going to just trim in some foliage pads and we'll be done. This is a very rough first styling of this juniper. All I really wanted to do was to compress it quite a bit, which I have done, and create a green mass down lower, which I have done. I turned straight trunk into a very twisted trunk, did a bunch of gin. Now this is a good 1 or 2 growing seasons from having much to look at on it. And it's got a lot of growing to do to get there. But hey, it was fun. It'll probably live just fine. It'll probably fill out and it'll look crazy, which I kind of like.